The term non-player character originates from tabletop RPGs, where any sentient being who wasn't in the adventuring party would be incarnated by the hard-working dungeon master. The man. The myth. Over time, it's come to take on a more nuanced meaning, excluding enemies and hostile forces to include both computer-controlled allies as well as background characters, shopkeepers, quest givers, and cannon fodder. It's basically impossible to think of a modern game that doesn't have NPCs in one form or another. Today's games have a lot riding on their NPCs. While weird behavior from them is good for viral YouTube videos, it can also pull a player right out of their immersion. The leader of the E Street Band. The boss. Bruce Springsteen is one of the artists who can safely count themselves in the pantheon of American rock gods. The boss has been making his mark on the world's musical landscape and improving the reputation of people from New Jersey since the 1970s, and even today, he shows no signs of slowing down. From the anthemic Born to Run to the introspective Streets of Philadelphia to the sheer magnificence of Thunder Road, Springsteen has graced the world with so many classic songs that attempting a definitive listing of his hit singles alone from the past 5 decades would be almost as impossible as it would be insulting. Dude made a lot of excellent music, is really the takeaway here, more than enough to produce an award-winning Broadway show in 2017. Still, despite the fact that he tends to wear his heart on his musical sleeve, Springsteen is less known as a person than he is as an artist. Today, we'll attempt to fix this by taking a long, hard look at his key moments over the years, the moments that not only made him Bruce Springsteen the talented artist but also made him Bruce Springsteen the man. This is the untold truth of Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen and the Greetings from Asbury Park era. Bruce Springsteen's 1973 debut album, Greetings from Asbury Park, NJ, is hardly his best album, but in a way, it's his most influential. After all, it's how the world found out about Springsteen's music. Developers have been polishing their techniques for creating believable computer people for generations, and Ubisoft's Watch Dogs, Legion, out now, might represent a huge step forward. Thought process. One of the biggest challenges for creating a digital world that seems realistic is human behavior. And as Rolling Stone tells us, for young Springsteen himself, it was certainly the most important album. Developers have taken numerous paths toward believable human non-player characters, but there are a few main philosophies that inform nearly all of them. The scheduler. While he'd been making small waves in the local music scene before, Greetings was where he started to draw lyrical material from his personal experiences and reinvent himself into the storytelling juggernaut we now know. This is seen in a lot of role-playing games, and it first raised its head in Lord British's seminal Ultima series. The album also introduced the world to a proto-lineup of what would soon become the E Street Band. Apart from the emergence of his songwriting prowess and backup band, Springsteen had a bit of luck to help along with his debut album. Noticing that human beings typically spend their days according to a fairly defined schedule, Origins designers tied them to Britannia's day-night cycle. If you wanted to visit a blacksmith at work, you couldn't do it after sundown. By then he'd probably retired to the pub for some mead. For example, it was produced by 2 music veterans who'd been writing songs for industry heavyweights like the Partridge Family. It was a simple change that meant a lot in terms of immersion. The situational. Plus, a single song on the album, It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City, was impressive enough to land the boss a deal with Columbia Records. Springsteen wrote Born in the USA out of guilt. Bruce Springsteen's most glorious stadium rabble-rouser, Born in the USA, has all the makings of an unofficial national anthem. Most modern open-world games work this way. The game only loads in NPCs and thinks about their behavior when it's relevant to the player. As long as you don't listen to the lyrics, which as NPR tells us, are from the viewpoint of a desperate Vietnam vet who returns to a country that has no place for him anymore. In titles like Grand Theft Auto, you're basically always guaranteed a certain amount of traffic and a certain number of pedestrians to hassle, no matter what else is going on in the world. These NPCs are loaded in the player's vicinity, leaving the rest of the city blissfully empty. There's a reason for this strange mismatch between the drab lyrics and uplifting tunes. As New Jersey 101.5 reports, the boss was very close to fighting in Vietnam himself, but he reacted to this daunting possibility by becoming a stone-cold draft dodger. Biography writes that Springsteen's sole thought upon his possible future in warfare was, I ain't going. So he put on an act that involved pretending to be high on LSD, acting like a total maniac, and invoking a concussion from a past motorcycle accident. It was his guilt of cheating his way into a 4F classification and dodging the draft that ultimately led to him writing Born in the USA. Presumably, it also had something to do with him becoming an influential and generous figure in Vietnam veteran charity circles. How Bruce Springsteen became who he is today. Bruce Springsteen is the kind of guy who makes artists half his age go pale when they see his touring schedule and concert lengths. Once they're invoked, they can have a number of reactions to stimuli, but they have no long-term goals or plans. The Sim. As Entertainment Weekly notes, his concerts in the 2010s have been known to last for over 4 hours. However, it wasn't always that way. As Ultimate Classic Rock tells us, the boss first made his name as a touring workhorse and a masterful performer during a stage of his career when he was a virtual has-been. While this might seem ironic now, relevancy was a pressing issue for Springsteen in 1978. He'd spent close to 3 years lingering in limbo thanks to bitter legal struggles with his manager that followed the '75 smash hit, Born to Run. By the time he was free to run, Springsteen had to sell himself to the public all over again. Easily the most promising form of NPC, these characters run using simple goal-oriented artificial intelligence so their activities aren't determined by a proscribed set of instructions but rather adapt to their circumstances. Which he did by taking his band on the road and playing over 110 concerts, averaging just shy of 3 hours apiece. The name comes, of course, from Will Wright's legendary series of Little Computer People. These behaviors are often triggered by what's called a state machine, which measures internal and external factors to select from a menu of preset behaviors, like finding food or fleeing violence. Many games also use a hybrid approach of these methods. Characters may have macro-level schedules, and then make simulation-driven decisions on a moment-to-moment basis. For instance, what makes Watch Dogs: Legion so fascinating in its approach to non-player characters is how it shatters the boundaries surrounding them. Each and every resident of the game's futuristic, dystopian London not only has a daily schedule and a robust artificial intelligence driving them, but can also be transformed into not just an ally, but a playable character. And the man wore his heart on his sleeve for every single one of those seconds. Even more fascinating, the process of recruiting them is intimately tied to their narrative activities and backstory. In the game, you play a representative of hacker collective DedSec, framed for an act of terrorism. The raw emotion Springsteen displayed, along with the sheer quality of his tunes, won the public over, and by the time the tour finished, the boss had cemented his status as one of the most electrifying performers in rock. Bruce Springsteen's relationship with Patti Scialfa. Rock stars and unhealthy relationships go together like peaches and cream. London is entrapped in a net of constant government and private sector surveillance, and the people living there have conflicted feelings about it. However, while Bruce Springsteen isn't exactly exempt from this rule, he's apparently discovered the secret of combining a happy marriage with a musician's lifestyle, and all it took was marrying a bandmate. As the Vintage News tells us, Springsteen found himself growing closer with E Street Band member and longtime friend Patti Scialfa. This eventually led to them becoming an item, though this happened when Springsteen was still married to his first wife, Julianne Phillips. See, rock stars and unhealthy relationships. Despite the less than optimal start of their relationship, Springsteen was still married and in the process of abandoning Phillips when he was already moving in with Scialfa. The boss found Scialfa a formidable partner who fought and loved him with equal passion. After a few years of keeping their relationship on the tour, Springsteen and Scialfa tied the knot in 1991 and have remained together ever since. Springsteen's tortuous Born to Run sessions during the making of 1975's Born to Run, Bruce Springsteen was haunted by a feeling that it was his last chance to make anything of himself. Using your computer hacking skills, you can perform research on anybody you see, learning their individual wants and needs. As Rolling Stone reports, he wasn't just being paranoid. His record company had undergone a major personnel shuffle, and the people left afloat weren't particularly supportive of him at the time, so he was quite possibly justified in thinking that he faced a do-or-die situation. With no real backup plan if he failed, Springsteen reacted by driving himself and the E Street Band into the ground over the course of several months. The painful process took so long that it delayed Born to Run to the point where its namesake single had already been out for 6 months by the time they were done, at which point Springsteen was so exhausted that he started hating the record and actually threw a physical copy of it in the pool after hearing the mastered version for the first time. Those also figure into how you approach them. Some might be sympathetic and join DedSec easily, while others require you to prove your bona fides. Fortunately, this was mostly just nerves, and the public would soon prove that his worries were for naught, as the album became a success. His net worth is quite impressive. How much is this celebrity worth, is a question that tends to generate healthy interest online, and Bruce Springsteen is no exception. While sites like Celebrity Net Worth guesstimate his bank balance somewhere in the $500 million region and his annual salary at a whopping $80 million, Forbes managed to dig up some figures that are likely more accurate and almost as impressive. According to the magazine, Springsteen's net worth in 2016 was a very cool $460 million, which made him the 14th wealthiest celebrity in the US, and none of these are pre-programmed events, but rather generated by the game, so every player has a different experience. Legion manages its NPCs through what it calls the census system, a tally of attributes and relationships that are built as they interact with the player and the world. While the majority of people you see in the background of your adventures are blank slates, as you play they'll start to pick up more detail. Hurt an innocent bystander during a firefight and their friends and relatives will see their attitude toward DedSec darken. His most impressive asset is perhaps a 200-acre horse farm in Colts Neck, New Jersey, that's valued at $10 million. However, Springsteen's current finances aren't the most impressive thing about him. If that attitude becomes too negative, they won't ever be recruitable, and will influence other people in their social circle the same way. That honor goes to the sheer touring revenue he's generated over his many decades of life on the road. Games advertise that your actions make a difference all the time, but in this case it's true on both a macro and micro level. Once a person has been brought into DedSec, they can be chosen for player control at any time, even in the middle of a mission. But when you don't call them, they go about their daily lives as normal, lending even more verisimilitude to the game's virtual London. In fact, between the 1970s and 2016, his various tours have grossed an estimated $1.5 billion. And they're not just interchangeable cannon fodder to be used as extra lives in case you fail in the line of duty. Their character traits, occupation, and skills determine their usage in the field. No wonder they call him the boss. He reinvented himself with Nebraska. Bruce Springsteen's 1980 double album Juggernaut The River was a giant, chart-topping success, in no small part thanks to its numerous radio-friendly hits. Following up an act like that was never going to be easy, and Ultimate Classic Rock tells us the boss originally intended to stick to his winning formula with another stirring rock album. However, he soon ran into a problem. His new songs, while powerful, were dark and moody, and the rousing rock of the E Street Band was both unfitting and unnecessary to back them up. Springsteen had recorded the vast majority of the new songs in a portable studio in his bedroom, accompanied by only his guitar tech, Mike Batlin, in a single session that ran late into the night. Recruit a football hooligan and send him into a situation that requires street brawling and zero subtlety, or a beekeeper, really, with a hive of tiny drones. It's a fascinating evolution of Ubisoft's sandbox model, which previously forced gamers to play as carefully focused group main characters. The ability to find a person in Legion's virtual London who you want to serve as your avatar in the storyline and bring them over to your side really seems like a quantum leap forward in how video games tell stories, and the developers have commented that this is only the first step in what they see as an ongoing project. The demos he created during this marathon all-nighter had a raw emotion that he found more powerful than the finished versions he and the E Street Band were tinkering with. As a result, Springsteen decided to take a creative chance and release his pared-down solo takes as his next album. The end result was 1982's Nebraska, an introspective, no-hype work that The Guardian ranks as one of his top 5 albums.
Future games on next-generation systems will be able to handle networks of relationships that are even more complex and robust, with longer memories and more nuance. What could this mean for the next Watch Dogs game, or Ubi's other franchises? Even without the ability to recruit NPCs, the census system adds a layer of unpredictability and vibrance to everyday crowd scenes. Springsteen evidently liked the stripped-down acoustic process well enough, seeing as he took the same route on 1995's The Ghost of Tom Joad and 2005's Devils and Dust. Bruce Springsteen unveiled new talents on Western Stars. Bruce Springsteen adopted a brand new method of musical mayhem with his most recent album, 2019's Western Stars. Computer-controlled characters with their own hopes and fears operating independently in the background isn't going to be the sole selling point for a game, but they represent another step forward in creating immersive simulations that feel realistic. Instead of the relatively pared-down arrangements of his solo albums and the bombastic sound of the E Street Band, the album is heavily orchestrated. According to NPR, its influences come from strange places such as 1960s soul, 1970s pop, and Burt Bacharach, a guy who co-wrote songs like "Raindrops Keep Fallin' on My Head." Plus, Springsteen's lyrics describe a series of characters who are down on their luck and a little bit past their best before date. Think about an Assassin's Creed game where massaging those relationships gets you closer to your targets, for instance. While this may seem like a fairly strange combination for a stadium rocker, Metacritic reveals that the album was in fact quite well received, and more than one critic has described the album with the ever-elusive term of masterpiece. Springsteen opted against touring the album, thus tragically robbing the world of his particular brand of orchestra-backed live crooning, but as Deadline notes, Springsteen aficionados still get a chance to see the boss perform his arguably most off-brand album. "We're excited to play Watch Dogs Legion, but we're even more excited to see what the team does next." How so? Well, he's filmed a movie where he performs all of the album's songs. What are Bruce Springsteen's politics? As The Guardian tells us, Springsteen has a reputation for political involvement, which is putting it mildly, although the boss has been stepping away from political discourse in recent years. His politics may appear fairly liberal, as he's cancelled a show in North Carolina to protest the state's transgender bathroom law, supported food banks and striking workers, and of course, pointed out the troubles faced by Vietnam veterans. However, his actual politics are rather nonpartisan, and while his views about people's right to a job, medical treatment, education, decent housing, childcare, and open government may sound like they're straight from the Bernie Sanders playbook, Springsteen himself considers his politics anything but left-wing. As he puts it, "To me, these are all conservative ideas. Economic stability. Health. That's not remotely radical." Springsteen got a lot of his political views from his longtime manager and friend John Landau, pictured above, who he calls the Lewis to his Clark and who got him interested in social and political issues way back in the 70s. Despite occasional accusations of brainwashing the boss into liberalism, Landau has hardly attempted to shape the rock star's views. He merely directed Springsteen to films and books that would provoke the artist to form his own opinions. Springsteen deals with depression. Depression might not be the first thing you'd associate with an electric, forceful performer like Bruce Springsteen, but it's a disease he's battled all his life. As The Guardian and NME tell us, he's actually experienced crushing breakdowns that have left him feeling like an empty vessel since 1982. He still has no clue about all the triggers of his mental health troubles, but he's very open about them and has grown to recognize the warning signs early on. He's aware that mental health issues run in his family, and he suspects that he got into music as a teenager at least partially in order to combat depression. Most importantly, he's more than willing to reach out for help. When his wife recognizes an impeding case of what Springsteen eloquently refers to as a freight train bearing down, loaded with nitroglycerin and running quickly out of track, they will seek a doctor and get his medication up to date. Springsteen also sees no shame in seeking out professional help, and he saw his first psychotherapist as early as the 1980s. The truth about his first marriage: Bruce Springsteen has been with Patti Scialfa for decades now, but his first marriage to model actor Julianne Phillips was a significantly more strained affair. According to the Vintage News, Springsteen met the striking Phillips in Los Angeles, and the two got hitched in 1985. Unfortunately, their relationship soon devolved to a cold, emotionless affair. The seeds of disaster were present quite early, as Springsteen went through a series of what he describes as anxiety attacks after the wedding, realizing that he wasn't ready to settle down. Their marriage was essentially over just 2 years after the wedding, and they finally divorced in 1989, at which point Springsteen was already with Scialfa. In his 2016 autobiography, Born to Run, Springsteen places a lot of the blame about the way things went on himself. Before Scialfa, he used to have a tendency to end his relationships after 3 years at most, due to his difficult childhood which had rendered him unable to accept that his partners could genuinely love him. He feels sorry that Phillips got the brunt of this unhealthy attitude. Bruce Springsteen's alleged affairs. Despite a career that spanned so many decades, Bruce Springsteen has managed to keep his private life fairly private and hasn't been involved in too many personal scandals. Still, that doesn't mean his scandal slate is entirely blank, as he's been accused of cheating on his wife, Patti Scialfa, multiple times. As The Independent tells us, in 2006, the singer faced allegations that he'd had an affair with a 9/11 widow he met while organizing a benefit concert for victims of the terrorist attack. Springsteen reacted to the situation by posting a short statement on his website, carefully denying any and all marital scandals. In 2009, Springsteen's alleged cheating woes returned when, according to People, the boss was accused of an affair with Ann Kelly, a woman whose husband accused her of committing adultery with one Bruce Springsteen. At various times and places too numerous to mention. As this attack was made as part of the couple's divorce proceedings, Mrs. Kelly immediately filed a counterclaim that said her husband was trying to cash in by making Springsteen pay to have the scandal go away, and she pointed out in no uncertain terms that her husband was hardly a saint. Both Springsteen and Mrs. Kelly adamantly denied any and all allegations of a tryst between them, and they say that their only connection is that they went to the same gym.